shoot a rocket into orbit, there is so much junk up there. The odds of something hitting you at 16,000 miles per hour is pretty high. And so that's where we are today. Now, travel that through 100 years. It's impossible to have satellites, impossible to go to space. We can't leave Earth. There will be trillions of objects moving at 18,000 miles an hour right up in low Earth orbit. How could you exit? So these are all problems we've created. And ladies and gentlemen, we are live right now with a good friend of mine, David DuByne. After the first cycle, after the 104,000 year cycle, David, you have the first precessional cycle. Then after that, it's an ice age for the next 4 cycles. The next 4 precessional cycles is a deep ice age. And the same thing happened in the last 100,000 year cycle. We were in multiple ice ages for 80,000 years after the last interstadial. So there was an interstadial 104,000 years, it lasted for about 20,000 years, and then it got cold. And it stayed cold until the Younger Dryas event that warmed us up again. And now we've been warm for 12,000 years. And now for the next 8,000 years, it drops way back down to the ice age. So it would take 8,000 years to get to maximum glaciation. But can you imagine the global catastrophe as the sea level drops 300 feet, exposes all the clam poop and sludge? Just imagine the smell. And then ice forms on the polar regions and in all the mountain regions worldwide. Now, what you're going to get is some amazing growing environments, which is why we picked the area here at Oppenheimer Ranch Project. If there are glaciers forming in the Rocky Mountains, every spring we are going to have the most epic freshwater runoff into our valley that has ever been seen. And there is evidence that the river gets 130 feet deep here. It did during the last event, and which is why our barn is 160 feet above the river, because we want riverfront.
Yeah, you got to think though, as the sea levels dropped, during the rain periods, you'd be incrementally, being washed out with that. And I'm wondering what kind of cities would be discovered from the last interglacial that are that far underwater that would reappear again.
Yeah, these would be megalithic cities, and we would rebuild them. And we would rebuild them for 80,000 years during that sea level low period. And then somewhere around 16,900 years ago, the sea level comes up like 40 feet. And all of the major structures are now underwater. You know the catastrophe is coming. And around 14,500 years ago, you sent crews out and you start making things like Göbekli Tepe warning centers, talking about the precession of the equinoxes. In the language that you're using. It's not in English. It's not in any written word. So nobody knows what Göbekli Tepe means because they are blinded by all of the gobbledygook that they've shoved in their head at university. These people don't deserve to be scientists. You and I have of an uncanny knack of going into a situation and pretending we're idiots. That's the only way you can gain knowledge, by saying that I don't know anything. So let's start from the beginning and let's see what's going on here. If you have a preconceived notion or you have some kind of a narrative you need to fill, you're never going to get to the bottom of anything.
Well, think about it, the time scale you're talking about after the ice had onset, after the exit out of the last warm period into the glaciation cycle, say 80,000, 90,000 years ago. Well, if it was locked in ice for that period of time, 80,000 years in ice, I think how stable the weather patterns would have gotten instead of this little 10,000 year blip in time. Now, put an 80,000 year window on, the planting and harvesting dates pretty much would have stabilized after the ice sheets reached their maximum.
Right. There are
40, 50,000 years to build your civilization on known growing patterns of food. Now, you obviously be closer to the equator and you wouldn't be as far north, but right. That's a lot of time for a stable civilization for grow and harvest dates, 40, 50,000 years. That's 4 or 5 times longer than us.
Right. And ding, ding, listen to this. Yeah, because we just started. The last erasure date, everything was erased, is 12,900 years ago. Everything's erased. So we've only been able to build for 11,500 years, and it only really kicked up 9,000 years ago. But back then, they had 10 times more time, which is why we have things like pyramids and Sacsayhuaman and these megalithic structures that no one has any idea how they would build. But I guarantee you, David, if you and I were able to stay on Earth for another 60,000 years, we would know how to build all that again. easily, and maybe just using harmonics.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah. Resonant in frequency. No, they keep taking us back to the fossil fuel end of things where it can only be mechanical energy to either split or lift something. But it's been known through history, and even in the Himalaya right now with the monks with their horns, to get a vibration to be able to lift large one-ton blocks and move it with your finger. I mean, that's known now. And then you put in the Tesla technologies and antigravitics and things that were suppressed for so long from the 1880s forward. I mean, they brainwashed an entire planet for 100 years that it can only be done with like horsepower mass to accomplish the task of building, when we should have gone the other way. No fuels like that, vibration and frequency, and that's it. And that would have been more efficient anyway, would have solved all the problems. So we would be lifting probably 1,000-ton blocks by now if we learned how to if we could harness that power, making an object weightless by canceling its resonant frequency, by putting the same canceling frequency like a Bose headset of speakers.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
I think that
Maybe I'm just out there today.
No, I think that what we just did was prove the problems with capitalism. Capitalism can be utilized to generate wealth in a free market, but capitalism itself is its own demon. It literally subverts the breakthrough science that allows for things like free energy, free flow of knowledge, and on purpose to generate money. So this goes, once you said Tesla, my mind went bing. And I said, look, this is what they've been doing the whole time. Anytime some technological breakthrough happens, some oligarch grabs it, kills everyone around the person that knows about it, and holds it. And then he finds out how he can make money from it. My father told me when I was a child, and I never understood this. He said the internal combustion engine is purposely being used today, even though it was invented right now at this point, like 120 years ago, because we can make money on selling gasoline. There has been technology since 1980 that we could have gone levitation technology for highways where there would be no accidents. There would be no need for fuel, very limited expense. But the reason they didn't go that way is there is no financial gain. It would destroy the insurance market. There would be no more car insurance. There would be no more fossil fuels. This is the money. This is all the money. This is like 23% of all the money on the planet, insurance and fuel. And so it's impossible to actually have breakthroughs in science that benefit humanity because there's no money in it, because that's where we've come to. This is an idiocracy. The amount of destruction on Earth for rare earth elements, making of batteries, solar panels, wind turbines will destroy the planet in 15 years. We will be buried in toxic waste up to our necks if we switch to green.
Sounds like you're getting a little, you're going to be above the neck to the eyeballs, man. You're getting furious. I see you. Yeah, the lithium thing too, there's not even enough to get the batteries. There's already a 30% shortage on that. So, I mean, that's kind of dead in the water. Again, was it the carrot and the stick illusion of that to get people continually distracted away from other energy sources? Or at the same time, thinking that there would be all these indoor vertical gardens and we never have to worry about food production, etc. A lot of things have been sold to the public that aren't exactly, full truths. And we could have, imagine planetary exploration by this time. If we had electrogravitics and you were able to encapsulate that weightless function of opposite spinning disks, and you put electricity into those and you made your disk spin and bend and bank a little bit, depending on where you put the electricity on the magnetic field, you could torque it and make it move right or left or up or down. We should have been on other planets already. Anything would have been possible at this point, and I really believe that we are trapped on this planet here. I mean, that tech could have taken us off-world, but are we meant to get off-world? And even, okay, just humor me for a second here. A lot of things we're talking about NASA and saying they didn't get up there in the 60s because the Van Allen radiation belt and the amount of lead they would have had to have around their craft to get them through said radiation belt would have fried them to a crisp 16 times over and back before they even got out to the moon. But with anti-gravity craft, it wouldn't matter what it weighed. You could put multiple tons because it's weightless. So it doesn't matter what the metal is on top or how thick it is. And you could blast right through that without the radiation, danger that there was for a tiny, thin aluminum hull that we've never been back to the moon again, like that. Some reason, because I always question that and say, wait a minute, every time, even wherever we go on the planet, we do it 10 times deeper. We do, Marianas Trench, we've been there. Then you can take tourist trips on a sub down there now. Well, it's like that with every single thing. You went up to Mount Everest. That was the hardest mountain in the world. K2, man, people are climbing that every single year now. Everything that's ever been done in humanity has been replicated and gone to like the extreme sports, whatever. Why is it only that one trip to the moon? Still baffles me. I mean, if it was like that, it should be like the Jetsons where we're going up there for the weekend and we're cruising up to the space station and we're up at the moon, man. But none of that happened. And it's just such an outlier by itself that nobody ever could replicate that from the 1960s and now 50 years later of technology advances.
In the 60s and 70s, the Van Allen weren't as riddled with radiation, according to some recent papers I've read, and that we, humanity, put the radiation into the belts due to all of the electromagnetic pollution that we're pumping into our magnetosheath. So we actually radiated the Van Allen belts due to technology, which didn't start ramping up in the 70s. And by the 80s, we didn't know what we did. And by the time we were able to read it, and the 90s and billions of satellites and all the antennas and everything bleeding out this electromagnetic radiation is now known to be, it's like a laser beam. The Earth pours it into the Van Allen belts from the surface. So we've actually created a barrier to get to the moon based on our technology. That's how stupid we are. And we're not willing to admit it. The mainstream media will never read one of those papers or admit that's what we did. And right now, NASA is trying to figure out to the moon because the world has screwed up space. Do you know how difficult it is to plan a launch based on the 1.7 million pieces of debris flying back any entry space at any given time? It's almost like Russian roulette to shoot a rocket into orbit. There is so much junk up there. The odds of something hitting you at 16,000 miles per hour is pretty high. And so that's where we are today. Now, travel that through 100 years. It's impossible to have satellites, impossible to go to space. We can't leave Earth. There will be trillions of objects moving at 18,000 miles an hour right up in low Earth orbit. How could you exit? So these are all problems we've created, and we're not willing to say that we're that stupid. And I just said it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Turn off the switch and start over.
Yeah. So a huge solar flare will literally wash all that debris back to Earth, bring all those metals back to the surface. We'll find native gold and copper on the surface again after the event, and it'll be brilliant because all those satellites are steel, copper, gold, platinum, and that'll all just melt on impact and be a vein. Isn't that what happened last time?
The black satellite's still up there, man.
Yes.
Wasn't that one? Yeah. With the solar activity really starting to be noticeable to the global populace and noticeable changes electromagnetically now. Like you can almost feel it in the air in the soup, and people are just starting to tune into this, not centeredness any longer because of this same electromagnetic frequency soup and pollution. So I do think it's starting to finally affect people. That it's reached that saturation point where humanity itself is now being saturated. So if you were going to start up at the different layers, like I said, F4 layer, and you were working your way down, and each layer continuously was more saturated. And then, I found it so strange. And this is during the Tonga and after the Tonga eruption, NASA had come out and said, because there's so much ash up to 180,000 feet in that center plume column there, the discharge is going to create so much more electromagnetic static electricity that you're going to start to see a lot more sprites and electric elves and all kind of different unexplainable things. But don't worry about it because it's just static discharge up in the upper atmosphere. So don't worry about it. Back to sleep. But you can see how it sort of trickled its way down here, and what we're going in the top, 1 or 2 miles of, whether it be towers on top of mountains or what's being beamed in and out by satellite or what's on the top of skyscrapers, that top mile or so of complete saturation around the base of the planet on the crust as well. So it's kind of working its way down. I wonder if we reach that saturation point now where it's complete electromagnetic pollution at every single layer in the atmosphere as well as the ground level.
Yeah, well, the threshold to space has dropped about 23 miles in the last 5 decades.
Yeah, it would be compressing down.
So it's
Pluto's
getting,
atmosphere collapsed as well. So, you start to look at these planets. Pluto's atmosphere collapsed. Is it Neptune's atmosphere reversed itself? The dark spots split apart and reversed. And you're just getting a lot of anomalies, X-rays flying off. And what's that? Saturn as well, and Jupiter with the 10X aurora. And then let's see, veins of minerals were glowing with an aurora on Mars just, 8 months ago. And now somehow our atmosphere is not going to be affected. We're from the outer planets inward. So if there's a change on the sun affecting the outer planets, noticeably with atmosphere, you could almost predict that something would happen on our atmosphere too, based on all the other planets that have atmospheric anomalies on them at this point.
Yeah, and here's bad news. I'm about to do a podcast over at Magnetic Reversal News on the fact that a new paper coming out shows that in the last 60,000 years, there have been 70 eruptions.
Oh, I saw that one. I read that one. Yeah.
Far larger than Tambora. And if you go look at the graphs, which I'm going to show on the podcast, every single 1,000 years, all the way back, we're going to go through 69,000 years. The last 80,000 years is so epically different than the last 10,000 years. It's almost an embarrassment to be alive on Earth now. And what I mean by that is there were VEI 7s all the time. All the time. We haven't had one ever since the Younger Dryas or earlier. The last one we could probably look at is going back all the way. Where would that be? That would be back to the pinch point 70,000 years ago. That was a VEI 7. And they said the population was reduced to maybe just 10,000 people or less or a little more. It's argumentative. But if you look at the data, that type of eruption doesn't happen every 70,000 years. That happens every 10,000 years, every 8,000 years. So we're at a 10 VEI 7 lull for eruptions right now. That is bad news for you and I. And that's
what was Tambora rated at? It was a VEI what? Tambora
7.
Year
7.
without a summer, yeah.
VEI 7. And so, but what the data shows is that's a low 7. Is that these types of eruptions bigger than Tambora happen every few hundred years. And we haven't had one for 70,000 years. So that's bad news for you and I. That means that a big one is coming. And
that was the Toba eruption then, wasn't it? So Tambora and Toba, right? And in the same region, yeah?
Yeah, and Toba was VEI 8 minus VEI 7, 8. So it was a big one. But those types of eruptions like Toba occur every 1,000 years, not every 70,000 years. That's the problem. And
really? Okay.
Yeah. And if you look at this data set, it's mind blowing. So we all talk about Toba. Toba has been booming every 1,000 years.
Dancing with the Toba.
Yeah. And it's quite obvious because like the Toba eruption isn't the last mass extinction. This isn't the embarrassment of science. And we're just going to wrap it up here. If you talk to actual peer-reviewed scientists that have graduate degrees and you ask them when the last mass extinction was, almost 50% will not say the Younger Dryas event.
Reason?
Everything's compartmentalized. Whatever he wrote his PhD in, whatever orangutan ass hair growth or whatever it is completely useless and insignificant.
Does that come with a razor?
The big picture people don't exist. When I got into academia in the early 90s, they broke apart the multidisciplinary approach. Physics, chemistry, and geology were on the floor of a university. But in the 90s, they broke that apart. Physics went up to the 8th floor, chemistry was on the 3rd floor, and geology was on the 2nd floor. So no one could talk to anybody and no one could get any answers. I had to ask permission to go up to the 3rd floor, go through a security check, to go then find a scientist to ask a question. And that was complete nonsense. This is on purpose. Multidisciplinary science is science. Compartmentalized science that we're doing now is a fraud. It's been perpetrated by the national. That's when the National Science Foundation was turned over to the World Economic Forum.
You think we have a chance? Great. Now, speaking of splitting up different disciplines, because I do believe that astronomy and astrology were both connected about 200 years ago, and they were ripped apart, and one was demonized, but that's the energetic flow through different parts of space that were categorized as whatever you would go from Chinese astrology to Indian Vedic astrology, or over here into the West, what we know as the 12 signs of the zodiac. to explain the energetic areas in space where the planet and the solar system were traveling, transiting through. But then you use astronomy to line it up to know where you were, depending on the arc and that sort of thing, where the planets would spin in their orbits. They used to be the same science, because you start to think about it. Well, yeah, well, okay, well, I know we're going toward that planet or that star. Now, what's the energetic between that in space there? Will it make the sun go hotter, cooler? Will we vibrate faster? Is there more dense debris up there? Is the planet going to get smacked? What's up? So, that's all been mapped out for such a long time, and then they split those apart. Yeah, well, the whole energetics of space has been that whole thing of the woo-woo now, and now you can only look at where the orbits are and where the stars sit and how they transit around each other. That's all you're allowed to study. You're not allowed to study the energetic patterns of that region of space, which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Well, that's why I have Micah Dank on the show, because I believe his astrotheological insight is so important to this great shift. It allows people that are questioning like the narrative, if they believe, wait a minute, is really everything wrong? And then you start to get into that and you start to question your religion or your purpose. I believe that that is the future of humanity. Now we're going a little long here. So let's finish it up with this fun exercise. If the world were going to end, let's say we had a date. Let's say, the empire is going to end. The grid's going to go down and it won't be up for 3 to 5 years. And that's going to happen in 2 years from now. Exactly. On this date, March 28th, 2024. The grid's going to go down and never come back up. What are the 5 things you would be prepping?
A forge. No, I'm thinking about going back into a forge. So anything that I would be able to mend metals or bend metals, and then also the understanding that algae floats on the water and it has oil in it. And I would have areas and maps, and another thing to be able to find what I would need to put in the forge. If I didn't have coal, I could use algae, squeeze that into the briquettes, because algae biodiesel comes from that. And if you have certain types of algae, and if you extract the oil out of it, it burns like in a motor. It's hot enough to give you that type of heat. And I would also have aqueducts and different irrigation canals and systems to bring water to places to make it easier to grow crops. But as you see around the world, there's vast aqueduct systems. So I would install one of those or get the knowledge and have that, but intertwine it with the algae production to be able to get that heat source to run the forge off of that. And at the same time, build out a full I wouldn't say aquaponics, but an aqua system that included the fish, the turtles, the frogs, and have that whole protein source. And that would just be step one of getting things ready for the forge.
Yeah.
And then you take it into medicines, and how are you going to produce your medicines? Well, you probably have to have 100 different types of flowers growing, and medicinal flowers in different ways, and the whole knowledge of how to use those and prepare them. These are the types of things that you would really need for society to move forward. You'd have to understand how to replicate modern medicines, going back to the base plant constituent, and how to remove that one constituent out of probably 30 in a plant.
Yeah.
Would that require some pressure, some heat? Who knows? Maybe I have to make my own alcohol. Well, then I need to start distilling to be able to get some sort of solvent to get that, whatever it is, out of the plant. So then I need to know distilling so I can create alcohols. But alcohols are part of the medicine too. But then they're also a solvent that can extract things. So, you start to get into this loop of really what is the most important. Well, I would for sure say medicine and forging, being able to do that. Then you could create tools. Then you could create saws and hammers if you needed to, if you knew how to forge. So you could start making all the tools again to rebuild society if you could melt metal. Because, look how much scrap junk's laying around. You could find a million billion things of aluminum to remelt, or steel itself, if it's not carbon steel, of course. But you got to start somewhere again, right?
Yeah.
So, and the food production, obviously, and the water purification. You can't do without sanitation, water purification. Got to have the food, the metals, so you can rebuild, ways to create alcohol and that sort of thing. And then, security of sorts, because once you start to get your region big enough again, others are going to want to pop back in on that. But then that's a trading opportunity. It'd be more on the trading end. You could set up new systems outside what we talk about, the money system. And, how do you get a civilization back up and running? Why? This is pretty much how it was redone after the Younger Dryas. They started with certain base things. Construction, too, whether it be mud bricks or whether you have the tools like a saw, which you could forge to then go cut a tree and then cut a board and then start over again. Or do you have the basics of mixing cement Well, there again, it comes down with pressure and being able to crush something. I don't know. You're going to need water to have cement. So you need to have that whole loop kind of system set up.
Well, back in the day, the first people with metal were the pharaohs, and it's not going to be like that this time. There's going to be so much scrap metal lying around. Any
Yeah,
idiot
so
with
much,
a hammer will be able to make a knife. So on my top 5 to survive and thrive.
Yeah, maybe I said more than 5, but I was trying to interloop all those 5
Yeah.
and just like different levels of it.
Yeah, I would say that the first thing you need is water. You don't need aqueducts, you need water. So if you live by a river and it's clean water, it needs to be close to the source. It can't be polluted. Almost no rivers, lakes, or streams are like that anywhere in the world. 99% of all rivers, lakes, and streams are polluted. So everyone's living by a polluted water source. So almost everyone's screwed. We're not. We're 11 miles from the Continental Divide, and our water is pristine. We can drink it directly out of the river. So you need
come up
clean
from a
water.
spring, and if you like, ours is spring fed here, so it's coming out.
Spring water. So you need a spring, or you need a deep well with good water and a hand pump. So water is number 1. And my number 2 would be a wood gasifier. This is a way to create electric and all types of other mechanical and physical energy moving forward. Wood gasifiers are expensive. They can be homemade, but they will be able to power your entire house or infrastructure if the grid goes down. If you have some electrical wires and you have electrical things that need to be run, you can simply burn wood to power a generator. These things all need to be in a Faraday cage, number 3, which you should have, where you put all these things that you might want to use. Now that only leaves me 2 more. And the 2 most important things after those things, in my opinion, after you have water, a gasifier, and a Faraday cage to hold your electronics, is the knowledge to harvest medicine in the wild, not grow your own. That's not going to be an option. If people aren't already growing their own hundreds of herbs and know how to make it, it's just not going to happen. So the easiest thing is to get a book on wild edibles that the Native Americans or Far Eastern medicine or any ancient culture that used plant medicines, get that book. And even if you didn't read the whole thing, you can refer to it and hopefully find the right plant. So you need knowledge. That's the final thing. You need skills and knowledge. And that allows you to grow your own food. If you've already been listening to us, you have seed stockpiled, you have dry goods. That's what every prepper has. I got 3 years worth of rice and beans, but I don't want to eat that. I want to eat the microgreens. I want to eat the wild edibles. I want to eat the wild strawberries, the wild raspberries. I want to eat the wild fruits, the wild animals, the wild fish. So I want to be able to locate all the food I need without having to produce it. Systems like I just blacked out there. Hydroponic systems and all that are great now when we have grid and energy and supplies, but that's all going to just be gobbledygook and trash while you're trying to get a minnow out of the river because you're starving to death, in my opinion. So there's ways to be abundant, and it has nothing to do with you overworking systems and growing food in hydroponic systems. You could just learn how to walk out into the woods where you live and harvest fiddle ferns in the spring, and then the next flush, and then the berry flush, and then the dandelions, and move on from that. And that would be enough food to have anyone survive with high nutrient density and high mineral content that will actually allow you to live and teach others how to live off the land. Because we're going to have such a huge population reduction that there won't be much pressure on the lands. The issue is after the downfall. It's very quick, 60 to 80% population reduction in 3 months. And then the rebuilding. So knowledge is key. Security, I like that too. That would be my 6. But most people, I think, already have dry goods, mylars, something, at least a year's worth of stuff, a couple months worth of crap.
I will repair your biomass gasifier with my forge. And what will we trade for that? 1 ounce of silver, man? All right, why don't we split that ounce of silver straight in half?
I like it.
That's a fair trade, man. Oh, by the way, cattail season is coming right now, at least here in Southeast U.S. If you find a pond and you got a clean water source, cattails are a great form of vegetable.
And people have no idea.
Way late in the season after all the start's gone down there. But
they grow from zone 3 in Alaska all the way down to the equator. The entire plant can be eaten. The seed head, the stalk, and the most nutritious part is the tuber. So you don't even need the cattails to be in. You could find the old stalk and go down and get that tuber, and you could be eating that rhizome. So a wonderful survival plant. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, provided your water's clean.
Yeah.
Love Canal Pond over there.